Good morning, everyone. So good to have you a part of the service today. You know, just when you thought that things were bad and they couldn't get any worse in this whole COVID thing and we're going through a tough time in a valley, just when you thought we were coming out of it, then all of a sudden, these terrible riots break out all over. You know, we're filming right here in a gully, and I just heard some frogs just gulping, some bullfrogs. We're filming in a gully, in front of a gully. And this was the valley that was just overtaken by weeds and thorn trees. And my dad, his dream was to have this dammed off in this beautiful lake. Gullies, valleys. If you heard Wednesday's edition, you heard of Words of Wisdom from the Farm, you heard me talk about Brigden Bruno. And we were on the top of the mountain when Brigden Bruno won the entire Jack Russell races, and I jumped into the crowd and hoisted him over my shoulders like I'd won the Stanley Cup, and everyone was chanting, "Bruno, Bruno." I hoisted him up like I won the Stanley Cup. I was on top of the mountain. I was on top of the world. Well, the next year they didn't have it, the Jack Russell races, but the following year we were there to defend our title. I had all my junior high and my youth and friends. The bleachers were full. The grandstands were full of people. And you know, they had banners and signs all decked out, and they had kazoos and noisemakers, and they started the chant, "Bruno, Bruno," and the announcer right on, "Brigden Bruno is back to defend his title." In fact, one of my close friends even made Brigden Bruno a prize fighter cape, and it said 2001 champion Brigden Bruno, and it was a red cape. And I even wanted him to come into theme music. I was going to bring a ghetto blaster. Some of you kids have no idea what a ghetto blaster is, but bring in this ghetto blaster. And you know, as we put the dogs into the little boxes for them to race, I noticed they changed things up. Because of controversy, they couldn't run a scented fur anymore, so they decided to put a bag and put some scent on a bag and run a bag in front of the Jack Russells. Well, as soon as they opened the door, Bruno just came out, stood, and looked at the crowd. He wasn't going to chase some old bag. He wanted that scented fur. And race after race, he came out and looked at the crowd. And he never ran. It was a complete disappointment. I was completely embarrassed. But to put salt in my wounds, there is the Observer to do an article about the fair. And they have a big picture of me on the front page of the Observer, and it says, "Every dog has its day." Unfortunately for Brigden Bruno, today wasn't his. Here's a picture of owner trying to fire up and excite Bruno to race, but he didn't. So embarrassed. I didn't even want to look at people. I didn't even want to walk through Brigden. You know, we talk about mountains and valleys. It can go so good and then so bad. David in the Bible, who became King David, actually is our picture of mountain and valley experiences. That guy went through the highest highs and the lowest lows. And I want to read for you in the Psalms. This is Psalms 22. And this is David speaking. "Do not be far from me," says to the Lord, "for trouble is near, and there is no one to help." God, there's no one to help. He says in verse 12 of Psalms 22, "Many bulls surround me," bulls. "Roaring lions tearing their prey, open their mouths wide against me. My heart is turned to wax and has melted within me. My strength is dried up. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. Dogs have surrounded me. A band of evil men has encircled me. But you, O Lord, be not far off. O my strength, come quickly to help me." And in chapter 34, verse 17, he says, "The righteous cry out to the Lord, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Here's David in the midst of it crying out, God, where are you? I am surrounded by everyone. They're like bulls, they're like dogs, they're like lions. They're surrounding me. I'm overwhelmed. I'm in the valley of valleys right now. God, I need you to help me. Where are you? And in the very next chapter, chapter 23, our famous Psalms 23, David says, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He guides me in the paths of righteousness. He says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you're with me. You're with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table in the presence of my enemy. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. His perspective comes back to the Lord. There you are, God. You are my shepherd. You are my guide. I'm going to trust you. You have what's best for me, and I don't understand why I'm going through this, and this. But as long as I have you, my shepherd, leading me, I'm good. In 1 Samuel 14, Saul is king before David. And of course, he's got 600 men in there encamped, and the Philistines are oppressing them. The Philistines are all around them, and they feel overwhelmed. They feel like it is insurmountable. And Saul's son Jonathan turns to his armor bearer, and that's a guy who carries your armor. Sword, please. Shield, please. Bows and arrows, please. And they hand them to him. He says to his armor bearer, hey, let's you and I go over and present ourselves to the Philistines. Their numbers are overwhelming. They're not going to feel threatened by us, but let's just present ourselves. And perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. That line it replays over and over in my head. Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. Sometimes we need to just present ourselves to the Lord and say, Lord, here we are. And will you act on our behalf? Of course, the Philistines are encamped on this ridge, and they have the upper hold, and they have the numbers. They feel no threat from little Jonathan and his little armor bearer. And Jonathan and his armor bearer present themselves. And the Philistines basically look down and say, look it, the Israelites are crawling out of the caves and cisterns. Look at you. Come on up here. We'll teach you a lesson. And Jonathan turns back to his armor bearer and he says, are you ready? Giddy up. Let's go. And they run up the side of the mountain. And this ridge, this mountain, they've got the toughest time because there the troops are overwhelming them with a vantage point on them. Kind of like Vimy Ridge, where, they call it Canada's greatest moment. It's known as insurmountable odds, this mountain ahead of them, but they charged it and they never gave up. And there was times when anyone else would have, but they kept going. And they said that was the defining moment of World War I. And they credit Canada for being the key player in winning World War I because of that key moment. Well, Jonathan and his armor bearer are running up this ridge, and as they're running up this ridge, it says they start to slay Philistines. And Saul sees a commotion, King Saul, and he turns to his men and he goes, what's happening? And they look over, and Saul sees, and he says, look it, the Philistine army is melting away. And it says that Jonathan and his armor bearer start slaying Philistines, and they get in panic and they start to run. And of course the Israelites come out, all 600 of them, and chase these hundreds of thousands of Philistines and have a great victory that day. We need to present ourselves to the Lord, and He will act on our behalf. And right down here we talk about this lake, this gully, this overran jungle of weeds and thorns. My dad had a dream. He had a pipe dream, he says, that he was going to dam off that end and have it as a beautiful lake. And he said, but boy, that dream is dead. It's not going to happen. And I said, no, Dad, we're going to bring that back. You know what? The valleys and the gullies and the ugly things in our life, we don't understand that beauty can come from that. We don't understand that with Jesus at our side, we can make it through. And this message today is really entitled, There Was Jesus. In the mountains and the valleys and everything we go through, there is Jesus. He can make beauty out of anything. And you know what? Beauty can come out of even ugly, ugly things. Terrible looking valleys in our life, there can be beautiful things come out of it. And it's hard to comprehend. But there's that valley. Look at it, full of water. You know, Thomas Edison, America's greatest inventor, was a telegraph operator. And then he turned into an inventor. And he invented electric power and sound recording. And he created also the first motion picture camera. And of course, Thomas Edison, the light bulb. But little do people know that he created and patented 1,093 patents. He had 3 kids and his wife. And you're thinking everything, he's at the top of the world, everything is going great. Money to boot, inventions, success, 3 kids, lovely wife, and at age 29, she dies of a brain tumor, and they don't actually know if it was the brain tumor that killed her or if it was the morphine overdose. And then he remarried again years later and had more kids, but then all of a sudden tragedy took another turn. His first son, Thomas Edison Jr., actually believes he can be an inventor too. And he tries to be a part of a movement which is the snake oil fraud. And in fact, this fraudulent thing that they went around and peddled, this snake oil that they said would cure everything, was a complete fraud. And his dad actually had to take him to court to get him to stop. Horatio Spafford lost his 3-year-old son in the Great Chicago Fire. Horatio actually was a lawyer and a businessman, and because of those great fires, his business was destroyed and financially he was ruined. So he traveled to Europe. He planned a trip to Europe with his family, crossing the Atlantic Ocean to start up again. And of course, he said, I've got some business to take care of, you go on ahead. And his wife and 4 daughters. And crossing the Atlantic Ocean, there was a collision that they experienced with a sea vessel. And their ship sank rapidly. And his wife wrote him back. And she said, saved alone. All 4 daughters died in that accident. And while he passed over that water, just feet from where those daughters had passed, he lost his daughters, he wrote our famous hymn, It is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. And we know the life that he lived. He didn't hold on to those valleys. He moved forward and said, it is well. You know, this valley here, we talk about how beautiful it is now. Good can come from the most terrible things. It's hard to comprehend. But even as we read about David saying, where are you, God? There you are. David talked to God. He cried to God. And sometimes he yelled at God. But he was real with God. And I encourage you all today to be real with God. Beauty can come from terrible situations. But we need to call on our good shepherd, it says in Psalms 23, and say, Lord Jesus, you are my shepherd, and I will follow you. And you lead me through this valley, and you lead me over mountaintops, and you lead me good and bad and ugly. You lead me. And you know what, this valley has a famous memory for me, because this valley right here is where I proposed to Lynette and asked her to marry me. And she actually said yes. See, beauty can come from those terrible things.